Sebastián Mendoza watched through the babycam monitor installed in the room of his 18-month-old twin daughters, Isabella and Valentina, as they cried inconsolably for the fifth night in a row, with none of the 6 highly qualified and extremely expensive professional nannies he had hired over the past 3 months able to calm them down enough to allow them to sleep for more than 30 minutes at a time before renewed crying fits woke up the entire 15-bedroom mansion in the exclusive Polanco neighborhood of Mexico City. "Mr. Mendoza, I am so sorry, but I simply cannot continue working under these conditions," declared Gabriela Sanchez, the most recent nanny to resign after only 11 days of employment that had left her face drawn and her voice hoarse from extreme exhaustion that no amount of generous financial compensation could justify when sleep deprivation threatened her own physical and mental health. "I have worked with dozens of families during my 20 years as a certified nanny, but never have I encountered such an impossible situation where children seem completely inconsolable no matter what professional techniques I apply or how much patience and loving care I try to consistently provide." Her frustrated resignation reflected not only personal exhaustion but also the professional bewilderment of a child care expert who had exhausted her entire repertoire of proven strategies without making any measurable progress toward establishing a sleep routine that would allow her twin girls to rest adequately while also preserving the sanity of caregivers responsible for their well-being during the prolonged absence of a widowed father who had attempted to maintain operations of a half-billion-dollar real estate empire while simultaneously managing a domestic crisis that no amount of money or resources had been able to resolve during months that had transformed her life from one of enviable professional success into a nightmare of sleep deprivation and parental guilt that eroded both her business effectiveness and her emotional well-being. The twins had slept perfectly for the first 15 months of their lives when their mother Lucia had been alive to provide maternal care that apparently included some magical element or specific technique that Sebastian had failed to identify or replicate through any combination of professional help, specialized baby monitoring equipment, or consultations with elite pediatricians who performed exhaustive evaluations without finding medical causes to explain the persistent insomnia that had begun exactly 3 weeks after the car accident that had instantly killed Lucia, leaving Sebastian alone with parental responsibilities for which he felt profoundly inadequate despite virtually unlimited financial resources that allowed for the hiring of every form of professional assistance imaginable. "Dr. Ramirez, I need you to be completely honest with me about whether my daughters have a medical condition that would explain why they can't sleep," Sebastian had pleaded during his most recent consultation with an internationally recognized pediatrician who had performed a full battery of tests including blood tests, brainwave studies, neurological evaluations, and prolonged behavioral observation without identifying any physiological abnormalities that could account for such severely disrupted sleep patterns that worried both the distraught father and medical professionals, who recognized that chronic sleep deprivation could have serious consequences for the cognitive and physical development of infants during a critical period of accelerated brain growth. "Mr. Mendoza, I have reviewed all of the test results multiple times looking for any indication of an underlying medical problem," Dr. Ramirez had responded in a tone that combined clinical professionalism with human empathy toward a father clearly distressed by a situation that defied conventional medical explanation. "And I can confidently assure you that Isabella and Valentina are perfectly healthy from a physiological perspective with no evidence of reflux, food allergies, neurological irregularities, or any other physical condition that would typically cause severe insomnia in infants of their age and developmental stage." His exclusion of medical causes provided some relief regarding the twins' physical health but simultaneously deepened the mystery about what was causing their inability to sleep while also implying that the solution likely lay not in pharmacological interventions or medical treatments but in environmental, emotional, or relational factors that fell outside the expertise of conventional pediatrics. "What I suspect," Dr. Ramirez had continued carefully as he navigated the sensitive territory of suggesting that the twins' problems might be related to the emotional trauma of losing their mother rather than biological dysfunction that could be corrected through medication or medical procedures. is that their sleep difficulties are a manifestation of extremely severe separation anxiety and maternal loss processing that occurred during a critical developmental window when primary attachment bonds were being consolidated through repeated interactions with a primary caregiver, whose sudden absence created a traumatic rupture in the sense of basic security that infants need to relax enough to allow for deep restorative sleep. His psychological hypothesis made intuitive sense to Sebastian, who had observed that the twins seemed particularly distressed during nighttime hours when Lucia had typically performed bedtime routines that included specific lullabies, rocking in a special chair, and a calming presence that apparently could not be replicated by a succession of professional nannies, no matter how technically competent they were or how genuinely caring they tried to be with children who consistently rejected their efforts at comfort. What can I do to help them if the problem is emotional rather than medical? Sebastian had asked with a sense of desperation that reflected the fundamental helplessness he felt as a father possessing the resources to solve almost any problem through the application of money or influence, but facing a situation where no amount of wealth could replace the irreparable loss of a mother his daughters needed, but would never return no matter how much he wished he could alter reality through willpower or financial expenditure. Honestly, what your daughters probably need more than highly trained professional nannies is the consistent presence of a stable maternal figure who can provide the kind of loving, patient care that rebuilds their sense of security through predictable routines and genuine affection that feels not like professional labor but like authentic parental love. Dr. Ramirez had suggested with tacit recognition that his recommendation was problematic given that Sebastian could not simply manufacture a surrogate maternal relationship through contract when what the twins needed was an authentic emotional connection that could not be purchased or scheduled through conventional employment arrangements. The conversation with Dr. Ramirez had left Sebastian feeling even more inadequate as a single father who clearly couldn't provide what his daughters desperately needed, while also recognizing that his search for solutions through hiring increasingly expensive and credentialed professionals had been fundamentally misguided, treating the emotional problem as if it were a technical challenge that could be solved through the application of specialized expertise rather than requiring genuine human connection that no amount of professional training could guarantee or replicate. Perhaps you should consider seeking help from extended family instead of continuing the cycle of hiring nannies who last only days or weeks before quitting. His executive assistant, Patricia, had suggested during a meeting about the domestic crisis that was increasingly affecting his ability to fulfill professional responsibilities requiring focus and mental availability that chronic sleep deprivation had dramatically eroded over months of unresolved struggle. Do you have sisters or sisters-in-law or even your own mother who could temporarily move in to provide the stability the twins need while you figure out what long-term arrangements will work best for your family? Her logical suggestion clashed painfully with the reality that Sebastian was an only child whose parents had died in a plane crash 15 years earlier, while Lucia had also been an only child whose parents had died of age-related illnesses before the twins were born, leaving the nuclear family without the extended kinship network that typically provided support during family crises when immediate parental resources were overwhelmed by childcare demands. "I don't have any extended family available," Sebastian had replied, his voice revealing both the accumulated loss of loved ones over his lifetime and the profound loneliness of facing parental challenges without a support system of relatives who could share responsibilities and provide wisdom based on experience raising their own children. And Lucia's friends have offered occasional help, but they all have their own families and responsibilities that make it impossible for them to provide the kind of consistent presence that Dr. Ramirez suggests the twins need to rebuild the sense of security that was shattered when their mother died suddenly. His explanation of social isolation provided context for understanding why he had relied so heavily on hired professional solutions rather than mobilizing informal community support networks that would have been a natural resource for family members with broader social connections or a stable geographic community. The increasing desperation of his situation led him to consider options he would have previously rejected as inappropriate, including dramatically reducing his work hours to provide primary care himself, despite an honest recognition that his own attempts to soothe twin daughters on nights when babysitters had failed had been equally ineffective. and also generating additional guilt over whether his inability to comfort them reflected some fundamental deficiency in his parenting skills or in his emotional ties to daughters he loved deeply but with whom he seemed unable to communicate effectively during times of greater distress when they most needed reassurance and comfort that he did not know how to adequately provide. The unexpected solution to the crisis that had consumed Sebastian's life for 3 months came not through the hiring of an even more qualified professional or consultation with an additional expert, but through a casual observation he made during a routine inspection of his home when he noticed that the twin girls had momentarily stopped crying while Rosa Hernandez, the 52-year-old cleaning lady who had worked discreetly at the mansion for the past 4 years, cleaning spaces without calling attention to herself or interacting meaningfully with family members beyond basic professional courtesy, had entered the girls' room to clean while softly humming a tune Sebastian didn't recognize but which had apparently captured Isabella and Valentina's attention in a way that no expensive toy or specialized electronic device had managed to do during weeks of desperate experimentation with various methods of distraction and stimulation. "Rosa, what song is she humming?" Sebastian asked with curiosity that reflected both professional interest in identifying what had caused the twins' temporary change in behavior and personal recognition that he had been so consumed by crises that he had failed to notice the presence or actions of a domestic worker whose work had continued silently in the background of family chaos without him paying conscious attention to her daily contributions to the maintenance of a household that he took for granted while he focused all his energy on his daughter's urgent problem of insomnia. "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Mendoza, I didn't realize you were listening," Rosa responded with the evident embarrassment of a domestic worker who had been trained to remain invisible and non-intrusive, while performing tasks that kept spaces running efficiently without disturbing wealthy residents who valued privacy and did not want constant reminders that their lifestyle depended on the invisible labor of service employees. "It's just a lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me when I was a child in the small town in Oaxaca where I grew up before moving to Mexico City to pursue employment opportunities that didn't exist in a rural community with a limited economy and few options for women without advanced formal education beyond elementary school." Her apologetic explanation for her humming included autobiographical context that revealed a personal history of economic migration from rural poverty to a position of domestic service in an elite urban household, a narrative common among millions of Mexican women whose life opportunities had been circumscribed by birth circumstances, but who had demonstrated resilience through hard work in low-paying jobs that provided a modest living while also maintaining connections to the cultural traditions of their communities of origin. "The twins seem to respond to your song," Sebastian observed as he studied the faces of Isabella and Valentina, who had temporarily ceased crying and were looking toward Rosa with expressions that suggested genuine interest rather than the distress that had characterized her interactions with all the professional nannies who had unsuccessfully attempted to establish an emotional connection that might facilitate restorative sleep routines. "Would you be willing to try singing it all the way through to see if they continue to calm down, or if their temporary positive reaction was just a coincidence?" Her request transformed Rosa from an invisible background employee into a potential participant in family crisis resolution that had defeated a succession of highly trained professionals, temporarily elevating her status from a service worker to someone whose skills and knowledge could have value beyond her formal job responsibilities of cleaning and housekeeping. Rosa cautiously approached the twin cribs with a mixture of nervousness about assuming responsibility beyond her normal work role and a tentative hope that she might be able to contribute something useful to a family that had employed her generously for years but had remained emotionally distant through the class barriers that typically separated wealthy employers from domestic workers who kept their homes running efficiently. "Go to sleep, my girl, go to sleep, my love, go to sleep, piece of my heart," Rosa sang in a soft voice that carried authentic maternal warmth developed through raising her own 4 children over decades as a single working mother who had balanced employment responsibilities with family care through personal sacrifice and determination that had allowed her children to complete secondary education and find stable employment that improved their economic circumstances beyond what she herself had. achieved with the limited options available to rural indigenous women without formal credentials or social capital to facilitate upward mobility in a stratified urban society. This beautiful girl who was born during the day wants me to take her for a ride on the streetcar. The traditional lullaby that Rosa sang with instinctive tenderness had an immediate and dramatic effect on the twins, who not only stopped crying but began to close their eyes as their bodies visibly relaxed from the tension that had characterized their postures for weeks of fighting sleep that their overstimulated nervous systems had apparently been unable to allow without the calming aid of a presence and voice that communicated maternal security that professional nannies had been unable to replicate through techniques learned in training programs that taught technical competence but could not convey the emotional authenticity that emerged from the lived experience of motherhood and the genuine love for children that Rosa instinctively felt toward these infants who had lost a mother just as her own children had grown up without a father who had abandoned them when the pressures of poverty had proven too much for young men without the resources or determination to fulfill parental responsibilities during periods of greater economic hardship. Sebastian watched with growing awe as his daughters fell asleep for the first time in weeks without struggling or crying, simply relaxing in peace as Rosa continued to softly sing while rocking cradles with gentle movements that communicated decades of maternal experience that no professional training could replicate because it emerged from instinctive love and intuitive understanding of infant needs that came from years of caring for children of her own in circumstances where limited material resources had been offset by emotional generosity and personal dedication that Rosa had consistently provided despite economic challenges that would have defeated many parents with less determination or commitment to their children's well-being, which she prioritized over her own comfort or personal aspirations. "Rosa, that was incredible," Sebastian whispered after the twins had been sleeping peacefully for 20 minutes straight. The longest period of uninterrupted sleep they had experienced since Lucia's death had shattered their sense of basic security that infant sleep required to allow for sufficient relaxation for the restorative processes that occurred during deep rest. "How did you know exactly what to do when 6 professional nannies with impressive credentials and years of specialized experience could not accomplish what you just did in less than 5 minutes through simple song and calming presence?" The ensuing conversation between Sebastian and Rosa as the twins continued to sleep peacefully revealed dimensions of human experience and knowledge about childcare that money could not buy and professional credentials did not guarantee because it emerged from lived maternal love and wisdom passed down generationally through cultural traditions that urban modernization had eroded while also creating new forms of professionalized expertise that replaced natural intuition with standardized protocols that might be technically correct but emotionally deficient. "Mendoza, I don't know exactly why my song worked when other methods failed." Rosa responded with genuine humility that reflected both surprise at her own effectiveness and discomfort with the attention her success had generated from an employer who typically barely acknowledged her presence beyond occasional instructions about cleaning preferences or changes in schedule that required flexibility on her part. "But I think maybe the girls responded not just to the melody but to something in how I sang that communicated real love rather than professional technique. Because when I sang for them I was thinking of my own babies and remembering difficult nights when money was so tight that sometimes I didn't know if we would be able to eat the next day. But the love I felt for my children never wavered, and that emotional certainty provided them with the security they needed to feel protected even when material circumstances were precarious." Her explanation articulated a fundamental distinction between competent professional care and authentic maternal love, which she suggested the twins could intuitively perceive in ways that explained their differential response to her versus hired nannies who provided excellent technical service but lacked the emotional connection Rosa instinctively felt toward children who had lost a mother just as her own children had grown up without a father, and who therefore evoked her protective maternal empathy in ways that transcended considerations of employment or financial compensation. "Rosa, I need to ask you something that may seem odd or inappropriate given your position as a housekeeper," Sebastian began carefully, framing a proposal that had emerged spontaneously from his observation of the dramatic impact she had had on the twins during brief minutes of authentic maternal interaction. But would you be willing to consider temporarily expanding your responsibilities to include assistance with childcare during evening hours when they have more difficulty sleeping? Obviously, with significant additional compensation that would reflect the completely different nature of the work I would be asking you to assume beyond your current housekeeping duties. Her offer was deliberately framed as a request rather than a command because she recognized that she was being asked to cross conventional employment boundaries in ways that might feel uncomfortable or inappropriate for a woman whose subordinate position in the domestic hierarchy might make it difficult to decline the demands of a wealthy employer who controlled her livelihood through decisions about continued employment. Mr. Mendoza, I have no formal training in childcare beyond experience raising my own 4 children in circumstances very different from your elegant home, Rosa responded, a mixture of temptation to accept the opportunity to help children who clearly needed the kind of care she could provide and apprehension about the appropriateness of an unlicensed housekeeper assuming responsibility for the well-being of millionaires' daughters when failure could have grave consequences for both the children and her own job security. And I am concerned that if I accept and something goes wrong, I could be held liable in ways that would not be the case with a certified professional nanny who has insurance and legal protections that I do not possess as a simple domestic worker. Their pragmatic concern about the legal and economic vulnerability of accepting expanded responsibilities without the institutional protections that credentialed professionals enjoyed reflected a realistic understanding of the power inequalities that characterized employment relations between the wealthy and service workers whose precarious positions meant that mistakes or failures could result in job loss without recourse or compensation. Rosa, I completely understand your concerns and want to assure you that should you agree to assist with my daughters, I will put formal protections in place through a contract that will clearly spell out your responsibilities and limit your legal exposure while also providing for generous compensation that reflects the extraordinary value of the care you've just proven you can provide. Sebastian responded while acknowledging the validity of her apprehensions about the vulnerability that accepting liability could create without a legal framework to protect her from disproportionate consequences should anything go wrong during her care of twin girls whose health and safety were obviously his top priority. Specifically, I am offering to triple your current salary and provide you with a room in the service wing so that you can be available on nights when the twins most need the calming presence you so effectively demonstrated. And I will further hire an attorney to draft an agreement that clarifies that you are acting as a childcare aide under my direction and supervision rather than being independently responsible for decisions that could have legal consequences should they go wrong. His structured proposal attempted to address Rosa's practical concerns while also communicating the seriousness of his desire for her to accept an expanded role that he believed could resolve crises that had defeated all the expensive professionals he had previously hired. The offer represented financial compensation that dramatically exceeded what Rosa had earned during 4 years of domestic employment, providing an opportunity to improve her family's economic circumstances while also allowing her to use her mothering skills in ways that generated personal satisfaction beyond housekeeping work, which was physically demanding but not emotionally rewarding in the ways that childcare provided when authentic relationships could develop. If I accept, I would need to continue sending money to my youngest son, who is still in college with the help of scholarships but needs a supplement that I provide to cover living expenses that scholarships do not cover. Rosa mentioned practical considerations that revealed that her employment decisions were contextualized by ongoing familial responsibilities that shaped her calculations of which opportunities she could accept without compromising obligations to children whose educational advancement she prioritized over her own personal comforts or preferences. And I would also need to maintain the small room I currently rent because my other children occasionally use it when they visit Mexico City from the towns where they now live and work after completing their education and establishing their own families. Her articulation of necessary conditions provided a window into the complexities of her life outside of domestic work, revealing responsibilities and relationships that Sebastian had never considered because his interactions with her had been limited to instructions about cleaning preferences with no interest in her personal circumstances beyond ensuring that she arrived on time and completed assigned tasks efficiently. Of course, no problem, Sebastian assured. understanding that his offer needed to accommodate the realities of Rosa's life that existed independently of her employment at his mansion. And in fact, if your current living arrangement is suitable and you would prefer not to move completely into a room here, we could arrange a schedule where you are present during critical overnight hours but maintain your own space during days when cleaning can be handled by someone else we will hire, freeing up your time so that you can focus on twin care, which is clearly where your skills have the greatest value and impact. His flexibility over specific arrangements communicated respect for Rosa's autonomy and a recognition that an effective relationship would require that her needs be considered as seriously as his own, rather than simply imposing terms that suited him without considering how they would affect her life and relationships outside of employment. The following days brought dramatic transformation in the twins' sleep routines as they began to consistently sleep for 6 to 8 hours each night when Rosa was present to perform bedtime rituals that included lullabies she had learned from her grandmother, gentle rocking that replicated movements she had used with her own infants decades earlier, and a calming presence that communicated emotional security in ways that the twins responded by relaxing psychological defenses they had kept. Elevated during weeks of interaction with caregivers they apparently perceived as potential threats or intruders into space that had belonged to their deceased mother, whose absence they continued to process by resisting the comfort of substitutes who could not replace their irreparable loss. Isabella and Valentina have slept through the night for 5 consecutive nights, Sebastian reported to Dr. Ramirez during a follow-up phone call he had scheduled to update the pediatrician on their dramatic progress. And the transformation in their overall behavior has been extraordinary not only in terms of their sleep but also in their daytime temperament as they are more alert, sociable, and evidently more comfortable in ways that suggest that the accumulated stress of sleep deprivation was affecting their emotional and cognitive development in ways that are now beginning to be reversed through the establishment of healthy sleep routines. His description of improvements provided validation of Dr. Ramirez's hypothesis that the twins' sleep problems had been a manifestation of emotional trauma rather than medical dysfunction, while also confirming that the solution had required authentic human connection, which Rosa provided, rather than the technical or pharmacological intervention that conventional medical approaches would have prescribed. "I'm so glad to hear that, Mr. Mendoza." Dr. Ramirez responded with professional satisfaction at the successful resolution of a challenging case. "And I'm curious about what specifically changed in the twins' environment or caregiving that finally allowed them to establish healthy sleep patterns after months of struggling that had resisted all previous attempts at intervention by highly qualified professional nannies." His question invited an explanation, which Sebastian provided, about how the untrained housekeeper had accomplished what credentialed professionals had been unable to through the application of instinctive maternal love and cultural traditions of childcare that modernization had displaced in favor of professionalized approaches that prioritize technique over authentic emotional connection. That is a fascinating story that perfectly illustrates the point I try to make with families about the importance of genuine love and consistent emotional presence over professional credentials, Dr. Ramirez commented after hearing Sebastian's description. "And I hope you will recognize the extraordinary gift Rosa is providing her daughters through her willingness to share her maternal wisdom and emotional dedication in ways that exceed formal work responsibilities and that deserve your deep gratitude and generous compensation that reflects the true value of what she is contributing to the well-being of her family." His emphasis on the value of Rosa's contributions provided professional validation of Sebastian's instinctive judgment that he had found a valuable solution to a crisis that had threatened both his daughter's health and his own ability to function effectively as a father and business leader whose responsibilities required mental clarity that chronic sleep deprivation had eroded during months of unresolved struggle. The relationship that developed between Sebastian and Rosa over the following weeks evolved from a conventional employer-employee interaction into something more complex that included mutual respect, deep gratitude, and recognition that conventional social hierarchies between the wealthy and domestic workers obscured realities about worth, competence, and human dignity that their particular circumstances were exposing in ways that challenged their prior assumptions about class and merit. Rosa, I need you to understand that what you are doing for my daughters is not simply expanded housework but maternal care that is literally saving their healthy development and my sanity during the most difficult period of my life since Lucia died," Sebastian expressed during a nightly conversation after the twins had peacefully fallen asleep under Rosa's care. Rosa had established bedtime routines that included not only traditional lullabies but also whispered stories in Spanish that conveyed cultural values about family, community, and resilience that she had learned from her own grandmother in a village in Oaxaca where oral traditions continued to be a primary means of moral education and transmission of generational wisdom. "And I want to make sure that you are receiving not only fair financial compensation but also emotional recognition that your contribution to our family exceeds any conventional job description and represents a gift of maternal love that no amount of money could truly buy, although I will certainly attempt to compensate you generously for the extraordinary emotional generosity you are providing." Her expression of gratitude was delivered with vulnerability that broke through the usual barriers of emotional distance that wealthy employers typically maintained with domestic staff whose personal lives remained invisible except when they interfered with the efficient execution of job responsibilities that justified their salaries but required no emotional investment or acknowledgement of their full humanity beyond basic professional courtesy. "Mr. Mendoza, I don't know what to say," Rosa responded, tears forming in her eyes as she processed the rare acknowledgement from a wealthy employer who would normally have viewed her work as a purchased service rather than an expression of genuine human care she provided because she genuinely loved Isabella and Valentina in ways that transcended contractual employment obligations. "Because I honestly don't feel like I'm doing anything extraordinary but simply treating your daughters the way I would have wanted my own babies to be treated during times when I needed to work long hours at multiple jobs to support my family and couldn't be present as much as I would have wished to provide them with the care they deserved and needed." Her downplaying of their contributions reflected genuine humility but also revealed how class and gender had shaped her expectations for appropriate recognition of the care work that working-class women performed invisibly for wealthy families without expectation of gratitude beyond basic financial compensation that rarely reflected the true value of the emotional labor they provided. "But that's exactly the point, Rosa," Sebastian insisted, as he tried to communicate that he was beginning to understand fundamental differences between wage labor and the emotional dedication she was demonstrating. "What you are giving my daughters is not simply competent professional service but authentic maternal love that emerges from your character and life experience rather than technical training or financial incentives. And that kind of care is infinitely more valuable than anything money can directly buy because it requires a generosity of spirit that cannot be manufactured or contracted through conventional human resource procedures." Their articulation of the distinction between professional labor and genuine love provided a framework for revaluing Rosa's contributions in ways that recognized the emotional dimensions of care that market economies systematically undervalue by treating all forms of labor as interchangeable and reducible to wage compensation that failed to capture the full human meaning of care relationships. The conversation deepened as the two shared stories from their lives that had previously remained untold through a class divide that had kept their interactions confined to superficial transactions about cleaning preferences and work schedules without exploring the personal experiences, aspirations, or challenges that defined their identities beyond the circumscribed roles of employer and employee. "My wife Lucia came from a middle-class family and was never completely comfortable with the wealth that my entrepreneurial success had generated," Sebastian shared during a moment of vulnerability facilitated by gratitude he felt toward Rosa and a desire to explain the emotional context that made her help so meaningful beyond the immediate practical solution to his twin girls' sleeping problems. "She always insisted that we raise our daughters with values around humility, empathy, and social responsibility rather than allowing material privilege to insulate them from the realities that most Mexicans face daily. And I think she would have deeply appreciated that you are bringing exactly that kind of connection to authentic life experiences outside of a bubble of extreme wealth that could easily distort Isabella and Valentina's moral development if they are raised exclusively by elite professionals who reinforce a sense of exceptionalism based on economic circumstances rather than personal character or social contribution." His revelation about Lucia's values provided context for understanding why Rosa's discovery of effectiveness had resonated so deeply beyond simple practical relief, connecting with principles his late wife had championed about the importance of exposure to a diversity of human experiences as an essential component of moral education that money alone could not provide. "That is very beautiful, Mr. Mendoza," Rosa responded, evidently excited about being seen not simply as a convenient solution to a practical problem but as a bearer of values and perspectives that would enrich the twins' lives through exposure to forms of knowledge and experience that their economic privilege might otherwise exclude from their development. "And I can assure you that as I care for Isabella and Valentina, I will share with them not only songs and stories from my culture but also values about the dignity of all work, the importance of family and community, and the resilience that comes from facing difficulties with determination and hope rather than giving up when circumstances are challenging." Her articulation of educational intentions that went beyond basic physical care toward cultural transmission and moral formation validated Sebastian's intuition that his presence in the twins' lives would have significance that went beyond the resolution of immediate sleep crises to a long-term formative influence that would shape their characters and world understandings in ways that wealth alone could never provide. "Rosa, that is exactly what I want for my daughters," Sebastian affirmed with growing conviction about the direction his family was taking. "And in fact, I wonder if you would be willing to consider not only continuing with the current arrangement but possibly becoming a more central figure in the twins' parenting in a way that would allow them to benefit from your maternal wisdom and love more deeply and consistently during their formative years as they learn who they are and what they value, through observation of the important adults in their lives." Her suggestion of an expanded long-term role represented a radical transformation of her initial understanding of how best to raise her daughters from exclusive reliance on credentialed professionals to a recognition that the experiential wisdom and authentic love of working-class women without formal degrees might be more valuable than any expertise money could buy from elite service providers. The proposal created an opportunity to redefine class relations within her household in ways that honored Rosa's dignity while also providing the twins with role models who would communicate values about universal respect and the value of all honest work that Lucia would have enthusiastically approved of had she lived to witness the transformation her death had paradoxically catalyzed by creating a crisis that could only be resolved through authentic human connection that transcended conventional commercial transactions. The following months brought Rosa's gradual integration into family life in ways that blurred conventional lines between domestic worker and family member while also creating a collaborative parenting model that combined Sebastian's resources with Rosa's experiential wisdom to create an environment that benefited the twins through exposure to diverse perspectives and experiences that enriched their development beyond what a one-dimensional approach would have achieved. "Rosa, I've been thinking about how we can formalize your role in our family in a way that recognizes that you are no longer simply a domestic worker but a co-parent whose opinions on raising twin girls I value as much as I would trust the judgment of a sister or close relative if I had extended family available to share parenting responsibilities," Sebastian proposed during a conversation about the future of their arrangement, which had organically evolved from a temporary sleep crisis solution into a deeper, more lasting relationship. "And I specifically want to establish a formal agreement that gives you the authority to make decisions about the day-to-day care of Isabella and Valentina without needing to constantly consult me on every detail as if you were a subordinate whose judgment I don't trust, because clearly your instincts about what they need are superior to mine in many areas related to their emotional well-being and development." His proposal for shared authority represented a radical recognition that conventional hierarchy based on wealth and social standing did not necessarily correspond with parental competence or an understanding of children's needs, which Rosa demonstrated more effectively than he did, despite her superior financial resources and advanced formal education, which had not provided adequate preparation for the practical challenges of raising infants during a period of bereavement and adjustment to unexpected widowhood. "Mr. Mendoza, that is extraordinarily generous, but I am also concerned that it might create confusion about roles and responsibilities in ways that will eventually cause conflict when our judgments differ about what is best for twins." Rosa responded with pragmatic caution based on a realistic understanding that relationships across class divides required careful navigation of power dynamics that could easily become problematic when expectations were not explicitly clarified from the outset. Because although I deeply appreciate your trust in my judgment, I also recognize that you are the father of Isabella and Valentina and that your final authority over important decisions is both your legal right and a moral responsibility, one that I should not assume even with the best intentions. Her reluctance to accept shared authority without clear boundaries reflected both humility about her position and wisdom about the risks of ambiguity in relationships that crossed social boundaries in ways that could generate unrealistic expectations or conflict when the realities of class difference inevitably reasserted themselves during moments of disagreement. You are right that we need clarity about how we will make decisions collaboratively, Sebastian acknowledged as he reflected on the complexities of creating structure that would honor Rosa's contributions without creating untenable expectations or completely erasing role distinctions that served functional purposes. So I propose that we establish an agreement where you have complete authority over daily caregiving decisions including feeding, sleep routines, age-appropriate discipline, and recreational activities, while major decisions about education, medical care, and long-term financial planning remain under my final authority, albeit with a commitment on my part to consult seriously with you and consider your perspectives before taking actions that would significantly affect the lives of the twins. Their proposed division of authority provided a framework that respected Rosa's expertise in areas of practical caregiving while maintaining her ultimate responsibility for decisions that required resources or had long-term consequences that he, as the legal parent and financial provider, needed to control. The agreement they ultimately formulated with the help of a professional mediator also included provisions for Rosa's continuing education in child development and first aid through courses that Sebastian would pay for, contributions to a retirement fund that would provide financial security for her later years, and, most significantly, formal recognition of her role as grandmother of choice to twin girls that would communicate to Isabella and Valentina as they grew up that Rosa was a valued member of their extended family rather than merely an employee whose presence was contingent only on financial compensation. The term chosen grandmother perfectly captures who you have become to us, Sebastian explained as they finalized an agreement that would formally transform their relationship, because although we are not blood related, your love for my daughters and the wisdom you share with them exactly replicates what a maternal grandmother would have provided had Lucia had a living mother been a part of their lives, and I want the twins to grow up understanding that family is not defined solely by genetics but also by the bonds of caring and mutual commitment that we create through conscious choices to care for one another. His philosophy of chosen family resonated deeply with Rosa, whose own experience as a single mother had required building support networks beyond the nuclear family that had been fragmented by her husband's abandonment and economic circumstances that had geographically dispersed kin who might otherwise have provided mutual assistance during times of need when communal solidarity compensated for the absence of abundant material resources. The evolution of Sebastian and Rosa's relationship into a genuine collaboration in raising twins also generated a transformation in Sebastian's understanding of class, privilege, and value that had been previously shaped by cultural assumptions about the correlation between educational credentials, economic status, and competence in various life areas that his experience with Rosa was systematically challenging. I've been reflecting on how many faulty assumptions I had about what kinds of people were most capable of providing excellent childcare, Sebastian shared over dinner they had begun to regularly share when the twins were sleeping, a ritual that had evolved from a practical necessity to coordinate schedules into a valued opportunity for conversation and exchange of perspectives. Because I spent 3 months spending fortunes on nannies with impressive credentials and years of specialized training while the cleaning lady working quietly in the background of my home possessed exactly the wisdom and capabilities my daughters desperately needed, but that I hadn't acknowledged because class biases had conditioned me to equate formal education with competence and to devalue forms of knowledge that come from lived experience rather than credentialed institutions. Her self-critique articulated insight that had implications extending far beyond the specific childcare situation to broader questions about how stratified societies distributed recognition and rewards in ways that systematically undervalued the contributions of workers without formal credentials whose experiential expertise might exceed the capabilities of certified professionals in domains where competency depended on qualities that could not be taught through formal education. Mr. Mendoza, I appreciate your recognition, but I also think it's important to point out that the professional nannies you hired were not incompetent. They simply did not have the specific type of experience and emotional connection that happened to be what Isabella and Valentina needed during their grieving process. Rosa responded generously, refusing to create a false dichotomy between her approach and the methods of professionals who had tried unsuccessfully to help. Because in different circumstances where children needed a different type of specialized care or intervention, those nannies, with their advanced training, would likely have been more effective than I, who only has the wisdom of personal experience without technical knowledge about child development or managing complex medical conditions that would require expertise I do not possess. Her humility about the limitations of her own knowledge while affirming the value of her specific contribution demonstrated a sophistication about the complexity of childcare that challenged both her own self-minimizing tendencies and Sebastian's temptation to romantically idealize the natural wisdom of working-class women in ways that might obscure the legitimate value of professional knowledge in appropriate contexts. Their dialogue on these issues created opportunities for mutual learning, where Sebastian's privilege and Rosa's experience informed each other in ways that enriched both their understandings of complexities of parenting, class, and human value that could not be reduced to simple formulas about the superiority of any particular type of knowledge or experience over others. I think what I'm learning, Sebastian summarized after several conversations, is that effective parenting requires multiple forms of knowledge and that my mistake was not in valuing professional expertise but in relying exclusively on it while dismissing the experiential wisdom and capacity for authentic emotional connection that you bring, which is equally essential to the well-being of children who need to feel safe and loved rather than merely competently cared for. His formulation of a complementary approach that valued multiple types of expertise without artificially hierarchizing them provided a framework for thinking about how the resources and wisdom of people from different backgrounds could be productively combined to create results superior to what any single approach could achieve, regardless of how well-funded or credentialed it was. The impact of Rosa's presence on the twins' development became increasingly evident as they grew from infants into toddlers, beginning to speak and explore the world with a curiosity that Rosa nurtured through activities that reflected both her upbringing in Oaxaca and her learning about contemporary approaches to childcare that she had acquired through courses Sebastian sponsored. "Look, Dad, Grandma Rosa taught me how to make tortillas," Isabella proudly announced as she demonstrated a technique that Rosa had passed on through hands-on practice in a kitchen that had become as much a space for cultural education as meal preparation. And she says that when she was little like me, she helped her grandma in exactly this way and learned that honest work with your hands is something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. The transmission of cultural values about the dignity of manual labor represented exactly the kind of moral education that Lucia would have valued, and that Sebastian's money could not have bought from elite nannies whose own class backgrounds likely had not included an appreciation of physical labor as an expression of character and contribution rather than simply an undesirable economic necessity. And Grandma Rosa also reads to us in Spanish about brave princesses and clever girls who solve problems through cooperation rather than competition, Valentina added as she hugged the storybook Rosa had brought from the community library in the neighborhood where she lived when not at Sebastian's mansion. And she says that the most important stories are not about princesses waiting for princes to rescue them but about ordinary people doing extraordinary things through hard work and caring for one another. Rosa's deliberate choice of narratives that promoted female agency and communal values over competitive individualism reflected a conscious pedagogy that complemented the formal educational resources Sebastian's money provided through expensive textbooks and elite enrichment programs that tended to emphasize individual excellence over collective social responsibility. Sebastian observed interactions between Rosa and the twins with deep gratitude and a growing recognition that his daughter's true wealth would come not from the financial inheritance she would leave them but from the values, relationships, and capacities they would develop through exposure to the diversity of experiences and perspectives that only the unusual parenting arrangement they had created could provide, combining material privilege with experiential wisdom that no one-dimensional approach could have offered. Rosa, every day I feel more grateful that rain brought me to your cafe years ago, Sebastian joked during one of their nightly exchanges after the twins were sleeping peacefully as they now consistently did. Because if I had continued looking only among expensive professionals, I would have missed the opportunity to bring into our lives someone whose love and wisdom are transforming my daughters into people that Lucia would be proud to see develop with values that honor her memory and vision for the kind of human beings she hoped they would become. His emotional recognition of the connection between Lucia's values and Rosa's contributions validated the intuition they had both had that their parenting partnership was creating a legacy that honored a wife and mother who had been lost but whose influence continued through the conscious choices Sebastian and Rosa were making about how to raise twins with integrity, empathy, and an understanding that with privilege comes a responsibility to contribute to well-being beyond narrow personal gain. The following years validated the vision Sebastian and Rosa had collaboratively developed about raising twins through a model that combined material resources with cultural values and experiential wisdom in ways that produced results that exceeded what either approach could have achieved alone. Isabella and Valentina grew up as bilingual and bicultural children who felt equally comfortable in their father's world of privilege and Rosa's working-class community, visiting regularly to participate in festivals, communal meals, and activities that exposed them to majority Mexican realities that their wealth could have easily isolated them from had Sebastian not consciously prioritized the integration of diverse experiences into their informal education. Dad, Grandma Rosa says that when we were babies, we couldn't sleep because we missed Mommy so much, Isabella remarked during a family conversation when the twins were 6 years old and beginning to ask more sophisticated questions about their family history, and that she sang us songs just like her grandmother sang to her when she was a child in Oaxaca and needed comfort when difficult things happened in her family. The narrative the twins had internalized about their origins and relationship with Rosa emphasized cultural continuity and the generational transmission of caregiving practices that had sustained their healthy development, while also providing a framework for understanding their family as built through love and commitment rather than solely biological ties. That is exactly right, Sebastian confirmed as he hugged both girls. And I am so grateful that Abuela Rosa was here to help us during that difficult period when we were all learning how to be a family after losing Mama, because her love and wisdom helped us heal and grow together in ways that honor Mama's memory while also creating new traditions that incorporate the cultural heritages of both Mama's family and Abuela Rosa's. Her articulation of family as a synthesis of multiple heritages rather than loss and replacement provided an emotional framework that allowed the twins to honor their biological mother while also embracing Rosa's contributions without feeling disloyal to Lucia's memory, whose loss continued to be openly acknowledged as a tragedy that had shaped their lives in permanent ways. Public recognition of Rosa's role in the family came during a school event where the twins presented a family history project that included interviews with Sebastian about Lucia's story and business success, along with Rosa's testimonies about growing up in Oaxaca and migrating to Mexico City, which shaped her understanding of resilience, community, and the dignity of work, which she was now passing on to the next generation through raising twins. Our family is special because we have two grandmothers, although one died before we were born, Valentina explained during a presentation that drew emotional attention from the audience of parents and teachers. Grandma Rosa is not our biological grandmother, but she is our grandmother at heart, who takes care of us and teaches us important things about being good people who think of others and not just ourselves. The simple yet profound articulation of values Rosa had instilled validated Sebastian's decision to centrally integrate her into the twins' upbringing rather than maintaining conventional barriers between nuclear family and domestic worker. which would have deprived them all of the nurturing relationship that had transformed their lives in ways that transcended the initial resolution of sleep crises and shifted to character development and world understandings that would define who Isabella and Valentina would become as adults. The testimony of the twins' teachers about their emotional, academic, and social development provided objective evidence of the benefits of their unconventional upbringing, which combined material privilege with exposure to the realities and values of less fortunate communities. Isabella and Valentina demonstrate exceptional levels of empathy, social awareness, and respect for diversity that we rarely see in children from very wealthy families, observed the headmistress of their elite private school during a conference with Sebastian. And when we ask about the origins of these remarkable qualities, they consistently cite the influence of their Grandma Rosa, whose teachings about the dignity of all honest labor, the importance of community, and the responsibility of people of means to help others have clearly shaped their values in profound ways that complement the formal academic education we provide. Her professional acknowledgement of Rosa's contributions validated Sebastian's approach while also suggesting that a model might have broader relevance to other privileged families seeking to raise children of character and social conscience rather than simply grooming them to maintain economic advantage through individual competition without regard for the collective well-being.